More so than the Prime Minister, I spend time in my constituency office loving and laughing with my constituents, no matter what they voted. I don't just want to probe into the idea that we all get abuse, and no doubt we're going to hear a lot of that today, because we all get abuse, and I've had a death threat this week that literally quoted the Prime Minister and used the Prime Minister's name and words in a death threat that was delivered to my staff. So we know that it gets out. What I want to look at today, and what I want answers to today, is when there is a clear strategy to divide. The use of language yesterday and over the past few weeks, such as...
Spotted me rather promptly. What concerns me about all this is whether there's any sense of a deliberate strategy in all this, and I'd like my honourable friend to reassure me. I assure him I have been a junior minister myself, so I do realise he's probably not consulted closely about strategy, but I'm not sure that many members of the Cabinet have much idea of what the strategy is at the moment. But can you allay two fears I have? It seems to me that, firstly, the Prime Minister is absolutely desperate to have an election before the 31st of October, so he can fight it before the chance there is of perhaps some untoward effects after that date. And I also fear that the strategy is to fight it on these people.
The social media giants have made some moves, but there is obviously a need to do even more.
Ed Miliband.
Mr. Speaker, all of us need to take care of our language, and none of us is without fault. But the Prime Minister of our country holds a special responsibility. And I say to members across this House, I spent 4.5 years opposite David Cameron. I never saw a performance like the performance we saw last night from this Prime Minister. He said this in answer to the honourable member for Hove. The best way, he said, to ensure that every parliamentarian is properly safe and to dial down the current anxiety in this country is to get Brexit done. Mr. Speaker, everyone in this House, I think, shares the frustration about the last 3.5 years. In fact, some of us didn't want the referendum to happen in the first place. But none of us can agree that the safety of members of this House should depend on the way they vote in this House. It is a disgrace that the Prime Minister said this yesterday. He should apologise, and the Minister should apologise on his behalf. Mr. Speaker, this and the language of surrender suggests we are at war either with Europe or with each other. Let me say, as someone who grew up with parents who were born in the shadow of war, we are not at war with Europe, and we are not at war with each other. Go down any street in this country, and there are people who voted Remain, and there are people who voted Leave. And there are people with different views about how Brexit should be resolved. The Prime Minister has a special responsibility. He is not exercising this responsibility. He is trying to divide an already divided country. Now, some people say this strategy will work. Mr. Speaker, I say this strategy will not work because the British people are better than this.
Minister. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I must say it was interesting to hear the right honourable member's brief mention of his parents. I remember the attacks he faced in terms of his own father and his reaction to them, which I thought took politics into a place when those attacks made was not appropriate. People should always judge members by who they are and what they say, not seek to attack their family. What I would say is that in terms of the strategy, I'm very clear when we liaise with me, but I have absolutely every right to put those arguments forward and to have measures in place to protect them, and not just from those things that cross the boundaries of the criminal law, but also from incessant abuse online, particularly where ill-informed. But as we all know, we did give the British people an opportunity. We were to give, as a government, the British people an opportunity to express their views on Tuesday, the 15th of October 2019. Sadly, for the first time in history, a government that wanted an election to resolve a matter was blocked from doing so by the opposition.
Sir Desmond Swain.
There is a strategy. The Prime Minister is the last thing standing between ending the Brexit enterprise entirely. He can expect no quarter. Absolutely everything is going to be thrown at him, isn't it?
Minister.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. I think it's safe to say, as you yourself, Mr. Speaker, reflected, that the Brexit process has caused passions and arguments and debate. But I think where the Prime Minister is very clear is that his view is the way to deal with this, and the government's view is to ensure that we deliver Brexit on the 31st of October 2019.
Still a Creasy.
Speaker, the challenge with what the Minister is saying is this isn't actually about Brexit, and nor, for many of us, is this about how do we make this stop?
That it toned down the debate, and ultimately, for us all, there is, bringing a resolution to this issue is a key part of what this Parliament is meant to be here for. And if we cannot do it in this Parliament, then I'd look forward to having a mature, sensible and informed debate with the electorate that we should have been having on Tuesday, the 15th of October.
Sir Alan Duncan.
Speaker, if you were to reread your Samuel Pepys, you will find a line in the diaries of over 350 years ago which says that so low has this rump fallen in the eyes of the people that the lads in the street cry, "Kiss my Parliament." If we are to avoid that same reputation persisting today in our current politics, may I ask the Minister and all in this House to apply the same standards, Mr. Speaker, you are asking for today to our conduct of social media, and that it should include us, journalists and the wider public if we are not to see the continuing debasement of the body politic.
Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm not sure whether I'm going to be reducing the "to kiss my Parliament" adage again, but he's absolutely. Well, I suppose never kissed an MP. There's a new take on a famous T-shirt some people like to wear. But in terms of it, he's absolutely right to say that it's not just about MPs. It is about journalists, judges, anyone involved in public life. Some of the comments this morning we've seen directed at one journalist would hardly be seen to be as the top brow of political debate. But as I say, it is.
Victor moved. Thank you. The question is, as on the order paper, as many of their opinions say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. No. Division. Clear the lobby.
Possible, and if only they would vote for it and would have the courage of their convictions, we would have one. She then complains that the Attorney General has called this a turkey parliament. I think it's more of a chicken parliament, because it is trying to flap away from the general election that we need and that would clear the air. And yes, we get gesticulation and murmurations coming forth from the benches opposite, saying that we are going to get one. But when, Mr. Speaker, when? The country wants one as soon as possible. And this Parliament, I think, rather than dead, I would use the word addled, like the Parliament of 1614, which was known as the addled Parliament.
Wouldn't it improve the atmosphere in all of our debates in the House if we returned to an older tradition and took a self-denying ordinance and all of us refused to clap?
Yes, yes and yes.
David Linden.
Mr. Speaker, by his own admission, the Leader of the House is not very familiar with nappies or how they work, but I'm sure he's very familiar with my Nappies Environmental Standards Bill. So will they agree to meet with me to look at when we can get a second reading for this bill, and might even be able to bring in a reusable nappy from hotspots in Queensland?
I'm very grateful to the honourable gentleman. I have a general rule which I'm happy to tell the House. As Leader of the House, I will meet any member who wants to see me to discuss nappies or any other subject that comes to mind. I think it is important that honourable and right honourable members have access to people, and I know, Mr. Speaker, you do the same.
Kerry McCarthy.
Of every person to determine their future peacefully at the ballot box.
Madam Chair, I'm just thinking, Madam Deputy Speaker, if the worst thing that the Irish could say of the European Union is that they made them vote twice, I can imagine they have a lot worse things to say about their relationship and their union with England. But anyway, this week, Madam Deputy Speaker, we had a sterling reminder from the United Kingdom Supreme Court that in the UK we live in a constitutional democracy with checks and balances on executive power. And we were also reminded, Madam Deputy Speaker, that for so long as Scotland remains part of this union, Scots law and the Scottish...
Or Ochil and South Perthshire and from the Isle of Wight, particularly when they started to talk about picking and choosing of results. And, you know, it's interesting to see how referendums that are one day decided as once in a generation, once in a lifetime, you have the power in your hands to make a sovereign choice, suddenly becomes something that actually a couple of years later we'd like to have a rethink, please, and it was only an opinion poll to start with. So for me, that's where we had referendums have a difference. They are something where people